Okay, good afternoon, class. How are we today? How was everybody's work week? Are we ready for session 2? So one post in the question and answer forum. So we will address that question as we go along in this class, this session. Good. So welcome. We're at session 2, and we continue the conversation around the legislation, the Occupational Safety and Health Act. So this session, this week, we will be looking at a refusal to work. Many of you, I think, should have heard that term before, so we'll talk about that. We will understand what are some of the powers of the OSH inspectors, and then we will get into the good stuff, which is the penalties. What happens if we don't or we fail to comply, right? There may be some other stuff in between that we will discuss in terms of fire regulations and those different things. But for the most part, these are the 3 main areas that we will spend most of our time during this session discussing. So let's get into refusal to work. So refusal to work is any means that an employee can take to draw the urgent attention of the employer to a hazard that exists in the workplace that is IDLH, imminently dangerous to life and health, right? So that section, part 3, starting from section 14, basically empowers the employee to take some level of drastic measure if that employee believes to him or herself that this condition or this situation can cause me to die or land up in the hospital, right? That is the spirit behind the law when that section was placed in there. Now, there are some jobs that are inherently dangerous by its very nature. So the law, understanding that, would have created what are known as exemptions. So there are certain categories of employees who are exempted. That's just the nice term. But the layman term is you can't refuse to work. And the law itemized those persons. For those of you who have your act properly downloaded and you're following, if you go to section 14, subsection 2B, it's going to list a group of employees who are exempted from refusing to work. Police officers, fire officers, members of defense force, that is Army, Air Guard, Coast Guard, VDF, Volunteer Defense Force, all of them make up the defense force. Prison officers, healthcare workers, right? So these are the group of employees that the act specifically says, by the very nature of your job or the inherent nature of your job, you cannot refuse to work. If a fire officer tell you, here what, I'm not going into that burning building, it is going to collapse. It is definitely dangerous to my life and my health. The people in that building will have to find some other means of getting out, because that is an IDLH situation. And I am refusing to work. You tell your fire chief, listen, that is a dangerous situation. I could lose my life going into that burning building to say I rescuing anybody or trying to extinguish this blaze. that is dangerous to me, to my health. I'll be mentally traumatized. I am refusing to work. If we have fire officers staying and operating like that, tell me what is going to happen where we have situations where a building or maybe buildings may be on fire. What we think is going to be taking place? What will be the outcome? What we believe might be the fallout of fire officers saying their job is too dangerous, they're refusing to work. What we think will be the fallout of that? Kevin Thomas, if you log in. What about Michael Lewis? What you believe would be the fallout of a police officer saying he's not going into certain parts of Port of Spain or Chaguanas because it's too dangerous, it's high risk. It's what we call IDLH. So he ain't going. Chief, that building, I got dead in it. I ain't going. Lives would be lost, yes. Either the fire officer or the people in the building. So we can't get away from that. Lives will be lost. But the very nature of a police officer or a fire officer or a prison officer's job is one that is high risk in nature. So I want you all to understand this. Not because these groups of persons are exempted from refusing to work means that they are exempted from complying with the act. Everybody think they understand that? I'll say it again. Not because police officers, fire officers, prison officers, defense force officers, medical persons, because they are exempted from refusing to work does not mean that those organizations are exempted from complying with the OSH Act. They more so have to comply with it than anybody else because, again, of the very nature of the job. It is high risk in nature. Therefore, they must have systems in place to protect their members or their employees when they go out there to perform their duties. Everybody think they understand what was said. Right? So, there are also a group of persons who was not mentioned in 14 2 subsection B, but they were implied as persons not being allowed to refuse to work. And listen what the law says. This part does not apply with respect to an employee described in subsection 2, a power plant or technical service or facility used in conjunction with an institution, facility, or service described in subsection 1 and subsection 2. So if you work in an institution that provides support for the prison officers, the fire officers, the healthcare workers, and all these people, then you too are exempted from refusing to work. You all think you understand that? Because if the function that you perform directly impacts on the police officer, the fire officer, these people, then you are now you are contributing to an unsafe environment. So the law is saying you also cannot refuse to work. If by you refusing to work, it now puts other lives at risk or jeopardy, the law is saying you are exempted. Good? So there are persons who are outright told you cannot refuse to work. That's our protective services and our healthcare workers. So what you find these people do is they don't refuse to work, but they rest and reflect, which is different from refusal to work, right? And then there are those categories of employees who name was not expressly stated. But if your operations is as such, whereby if you refuse to work, you endanger the lives of others, then you too are exempted from refusing to work. Yes? Anything anybody doesn't understand at this point in time? Everybody clear? No? Good. So we are moving on. So we're getting in now to refusing to work. How does this work? How does this happen? So the law gives four main categories whereby an employee could refuse to work. So it's not a women fancy. You just get up one morning and decide you ain't want to work today, or you and the supervisor have some industrial relations issue and you all of a sudden now realize you have a health and safety issue. So you now want to refuse to work. There's a breakdown in communication between management and workers. And then we now realize we have health and safety issues. So we will use that now to not get any work done. No. The law is clear. There are four main reasons you should refuse to work. Something is serious and imminently dangerous to your life. Remember that IDLH situation I was talking about, imminently dangerous to life and health, IDLH. So you're going to work on a scaffolding and the scaffolding is not properly secured and you don't feel safe going up 2, 3, 5 lifts of the scaffolding that's not properly secured. That is an IDLH situation. You're going to work in a confined space and you have not seen anybody done any air quality monitoring and you're not sure exactly what is the quality of the air in that space, or you have not seen any drawings for the space in which they're telling you have to go into, yes, you could refuse to work, right? So those are your serious and imminent dangerous situations. The next point is that you are asked to work with some piece of machinery or equipment that can cause serious or imminent danger. So you're going to be working with a table saw and the guards on the table saw not working, or the automatic brakes on the table saw not working. And you are asked to work with this piece of equipment, and obviously you run the risk of amputating your finger or amputating your whole hand, and you're not comfortable, yes, you can refuse to work. You may have to work with a crane. You're doing some level of lifting operations, and you notice that this crane is losing lift. It's not maintaining height. And you really feel that this crane can't do this job. It's mechanically not sound. You can refuse to work with that piece of machinery or equipment, right? If your physical condition in the workspace is hazardous, you could refuse to work. So you're working in an environment and you have toxic fumes being emanated or large amount of dust being generated, you can refuse to work in that physical condition because that toxic fume or the presence of that level of dust, it can now present an IDLH situation for you as the employee. And the fourth reason is a combination of everything. It's an amalgamation of everything, or anything that contravenes the act. Now, I don't want you to stop there because that's where most employees run into problems. The law talks about being able to refuse to work if you realize that there's something in the workspace that contravenes the act. But it didn't stop there. It went on further to say, and that contravention puts your life at risk, then yes, you can refuse to work. If you put a full stop by contravenes the act or regulations and you put full stop, you are going to have a totally different interpretation of that section of the law than if you continue the conversation, which says that contravention must be dangerous to your life or your health. Everybody understands what I'm saying? So, not having toilet facilities, it's a contravention of the act. But does that contravention present death or critical injury to you as an employee? Right? You may have blown bulbs. Would those blown bulbs lead to death or critical injury? Lighting is a requirement under the law. But does that present imminent danger to you as an employee? So you must take into consideration the environment, the nature of the work that is being performed in the environment to determine if these violations are IDLH situations. We clear? Everybody understand when we should refuse to work? Good. So now that we understand when we should refuse to work, let us understand the process, because there's where a lot of employees run into problems with the law, because they are of the opinion that when we say refusal to work, is a matter we just ups and we go on. We refuse to work and that is it. Pack your bags, go home. But it's not. The law has given very clear descriptive explanation as to how this refusal to work process should move along. So the first thing you must do is notify your employer of your intent to refuse to work or do particular work. So you might not be refusing to do work, but might be part thereof. Or you might be refusing to work with some piece of equipment. So the law is saying under section 16, first thing you must do, let your employer know. Who is your employer? That is either your supervisor or your manager or HR. However your organization structured. Those are the people you are informing that you have a refusal to work issue, right? The law goes on to say that the employer must investigate this refusal to work forthwith. So you have a problem, you notify the employer have a right to investigate. So it's going to go before your Joint Safety and Health Committee. If you don't have a Joint Safety and Health Committee, you can now select people to be part of this investigative team who will go forth and investigate your claims, right? So when it is you don't have your safety committee, you have this team, you put your case before the chief inspector. The chief inspector would now adjudicate through this team that you're going to put together to do this investigation for you, right? Now, if you have a Joint Safety and Health Committee and they investigate and they realize, yeah, boy, this employee have some grounds to refuse to work, right? You need to now notify the chief inspector. If you don't have a safety committee and you go directly to the chief will then now appoint an inspector to investigate the claims for you. Everybody understand that? Now, when you, through your committee, you realize that yes, the employee has grounds, or you believe the employee has grounds to refuse to work, you now inform the chief. The chief will also assign an inspector to investigate, right? So again, the law says the chief have to assign an inspector within 24 hours to investigate this case. After the inspector is assigned within 24 hours, that inspector has 72 hours to let the employer know in writing, yes, there's a refusal to work case. No, there's not a refusal to work case. Everybody understand how that goes? So you have a refusal to work, you inform the employer, the committee convenes, investigate. If the employee has claims, we send it down to USH. They assign an inspector, and the inspector would now investigate and give a response in 72 hours. Yeah? Now, while the inspector is conducting his or her investigation, here are some things that you need to do as the employee. You need to be at work every single day for those next 3 days that the inspector is doing their investigation. In some safe place, of course. And the reason for that is whenever the inspector needs to get information, you are readily available to cooperate and work with the inspector to solve your problem. So you can't refuse to work, Anderson, and you in Price Mart shopping, or you going to Tobago for a weekend, and they say, well, yeah, USH investigating, they go deal with that. Right? You have to be in the workplace. You have to be in the space to answer any questions that may arise during the inspector's investigation. Right? The employer must not assign anybody else to operate any equipment or work in the space in which is being investigated. Right? So if we say this crane, we have a problem with it, that is the reason we refuse to work. You can now take that crane and assign it to somebody else who you feel could get the job done using the same crane that is now under investigation by the USH inspector. That's a big no-no under the law, right? Sion is in class. Sion here today? Sion not in class. So Sion would have asked a question if employees could be disciplined for refusing to work. And the answer to that is they should not be disciplined. But we have to face the honest reality. What's stopping them from doing it? Right? They could discipline you, they could fire you, and then you now go to USH and make a claim, and you now get caught up in our lengthy legal judicial system. And by the time you get redress, it might be 5, 6, 10 years down the road. What happens to you in that period of time that you're waiting for justice to be served? But the law makes provision. The law says that no employee should be disciplined or threatened to be disciplined for refusing to work. But that is in black and white, that's on paper. But in actuality or reality, there are some employers will discipline their employees for refusing to work. Right? Kevin, you have a comment there? When you say excuse, what you mean, Kevin? Help me understand the point you're making. So your refusal to work must fall within one of these 4 areas here, Kevin. Anything outside of that You use your company's policies, procedures, your collective agreement, all those different things to deal with it. Or you call in the inspector directly and let them know. But it would not be one that warrants a refusal to work. Understand the spirit behind refusal to work. Refusal to work is when you have an idealate situation, and you once you continue to work in this situation, we guarantee that someone will die or end up in hospital. So because of those circumstances, and you can't wait for an inspector to come, or you can't wait for the safety officer to reach, or you can't wait for somebody of authority to respond, the law has empowered employees to say, listen, you have the right, you can refuse to work. So that means work could halt and we must investigate. Right, Kevin? So I don't like the term you use, excuse. It's not an excuse, right? It is a situation, an idealate situation, and you are now refusing to work for it, right? Carol has a question. What about the employers that are aware of the workplace being unsafe and still insist you work while you are refusing to work? So remember, I spoke about this. No employee shall be assigned to use or operate the equipment or machine during that investigation. So if that is happening, remember the inspector is there. You just bring that to the attention of the inspector. Let them know that, listen, you are investigating here, but look, I receive an email telling me to take up shift and go and work in the space or go and work out with the equipment while this investigation is going on. So as an employee, you have the right to bring that to the attention of the inspector, right? So there are provisions in place. Section 21 talks about persons must be paid during that refusal to work period. So this is why it is ever so more imperative of employees to be on work during this investigative period, because the law is telling your employer, pending and during an investigation under this part, the employee and the persons mentioned in section 16(2) or B shall be deemed to be at work, and his employer shall pay him his usual rate. You all remember what we said about when we hear that word shall, what it means? What does shall means? When we hear shall in the law, what it means? It's something you must do. So if employers must pay employees, then it means that employees must be in work. So Kevin, you can't be in PriceSmart while the investigation going on. We can't have people in B-Mobile, or you're in courts and you're shopping, you're on High Street looking for school books and all these things, and you raise a red flag about a hazard in the work environment. We summons the OSHA inspector, and they're here doing an investigation, and you looking for school books and uniform. If you want time off, there's a process for that. But don't say you're refusing to work because you want time off. There are 4 simple categories under which you can refuse to work. Yeah? Good. So after the 72 hours, the inspector give you his or her decision in writing. You have to understand and accept that decision of the inspector. If for some reason you believe the inspector was biased or would have missed some pertinent information during the investigation, you can take your plight to the chief inspector. Of course, in writing, because the inspector would have given you his or her decision in writing. So you write the chief inspector and you make an appeal based on the decision that was taken. The chief inspector may tell you, well, they uphold the decision of the inspector, and based on whatever is the facts or the findings that came out of the investigation, the chief will say he or she agree with the inspector. You might still say to yourself, all in collusion, that ain't making no sense. You can now take that matter to the industrial court and have the matter heard before the court and let the court make a decision. If you are not willing to go to that length and breadth, please comply with the decision of the inspectors. Because if you fail to do that, you all see the fine down below? You all see that nice fine down below? Some of us wish we could get that amount of money now. So if we're wishing for that amount of money now, let's not put ourselves in a position where we have to pay that fine. We comply with the decision of the inspector, right? If we don't, and we headstrong and we going down with nothing, you can be fined $20,000 and thrown in jail for 1 year. It ain't making sense. You're going to spend a whole year rubbing shoulders with attempted murderers, rapists, kidnappers, and all these people. It ain't making sense. Good. So, any questions on refusal to work before we move on? Anybody feel they missed something that they need further explanation on? This class too quiet, you know. I don't know what all they're doing in the background, but as we asking questions and it have no kind of feedback. So sometimes I feel people just log on and they go on about their business. Kevin processing. Kevin, you had to process faster than that. IDLH is imminently dangerous to life and health. Good, so we could move on to safety. So in this section, it talks about young persons. So young persons coming to the workplace must be supervised. We must not just release them into the workspace and say, yeah, here we're going on today, this is what you're doing, you're going and operate here, you're going and do this, you're going and do that, and you leave them on their own. No. They must be trained, they must be given proper instructions, and they must be supervised. Yes? The person who is training them or giving them instructions must be a competent person. Who is a competent person? Somebody with the requisite skills, qualifications, and experience about the particular task. So you're going to pair this person, this young person, and that young person is somebody between the age of 16 and 18. You pair them up with this competent person and you have them supervised and directed accordingly. Don't leave them to go and do things on their own. Have them operating machinery and equipment by themselves. They must be supervised, right? Continuing in the safety section of the law, removal of dust and fumes from the workspace. So if your operations is one that generates high levels of dust or fumes or particles in the air, you must have systems in place to remove those contaminants from the air. Don't just hand people PPE. Well, we have plenty dust, look some dust mask. We have fumes, look a respirator. No. You must have some form of measures in place, and we'll start talking about that in detail next session, next week. right? Safety arrangements for working in confined spaces, and the law spoke in detail at nauseam in section 25 about confined spaces. To work in a confined space, you must have an oxygen level of between 18.5 and 23%. If we have anything more than 23%, what do you think will happen in that space? Why we don't want any space with more than 23% of oxygen? What happens to a space when it's over oxygenated? Apart from you feeling high, what else happens to a space when we have too much oxygen? Thank you very much, Anderson. You now have what is called a flammable environment. So oxygen in concentrations above 23% can cause fires and explosions. Yes? So before you go into any space, you're looking for oxygen levels between 18% and 23%. Some companies might tell you 18.5% and 23%. Another company might say 19% to 23%. Either way, it must not go beneath 18%. Everybody understand that? And this is what we're talking about working in confined spaces, right? That section also talk about the space being inspected and certified by a competent person. We're hearing that term again. Competent person certifying the space before we send people into the confined space, right? And again, when we start to talk about workplace hazards, we will go into greater detail about what is a confined space, how we define it, and how we work in those spaces, right? But the law under section 25 gives us very descriptive details as to how we work safely in confined spaces. Let us now talk about primary movers. So these are machinery that have moving parts. So we have pumps, we have rotating shafts, we have gears, we have rotating wheels, we have all different types of machinery in different work environments with rotating parts. And the law tells us that these primary movers and dangerous machineries must be sufficiently guarded. And again, we will talk more about guards when we start to talk about our safety hazards, those mechanical hazards that exist in the workspace, right? Safety and Health Committee. So you all heard me mention about Joint Safety and Health Committee when we were discussing refusal to work, right? So the law under section 25E requires employers who have 25 or more employees in their industrial establishment to develop or establish a safety committee. What is a safety committee? It is a committee comprising of both management and employee representatives to sit and meet and treat with health and safety issues in the workspace. Only health and safety issues. At those committees, we're not talking about wage negotiation. At those committees, we're not planning the next retreat. At those committees, we're not going and discuss our personal business, our personal lives. We're not going to discuss acting arrangements and issuance of allowances and all these different things. There are separate committees to deal with those things. But at your Joint Safety and Health Committee, you are discussing wholly, solely, and only health and safety matters. So you could discuss accident statistics. You can draft policies, health and safety policies. You can discuss strategies to reduce accidents. You can discuss the safety on job sites and projects. You investigate accidents or refusal to work issues. All those are roles and functions of your Joint Safety and Health Committee, right? So where your organization have 25 or more persons, you must have a safety committee established. Now, your organization may have 5 persons, but you do confined space work. So let's say it's a diving company you have, and it's only 5 of you all, you as the managing director, 1 diving supervisor, and 3 divers. It's just 5 of you, small company. But based on the nature of the work that you all do, the chief inspector will advise you to establish a safety committee. It's going to be a small committee because there's only 5 of you, right? So, any questions on safety committee? So let's go to the next point, health surveillance. You all remember we spoke about this last week, right? What was the discussion we had around health surveillance last week? Somebody help me. I alone can't do all the talking all. We spoke about health surveillance last week. What we discussed about health surveillance. Michael, what you remember was our discussion about health surveillance last week. What about Kevin? Anderson? Mr. Gibbs? What was our discussion about health surveillance? What you all remember about our discussion about health surveillance when we say employers must develop a health surveillance program for their employees? Why? And what we say must be done. So nobody going to pass the exam next week then? No problem. It's a health check, but why are we doing these health checks? And for how long we say we're going to be maintaining the records of these health checks? Good. So we doing these health checks and we are monitoring employees' health to ensure that there are no risks in the workplace that is compromising their health. And the law tells us that we need to maintain these health records for 25 years. Why are we keeping it for 25 years and not 10 years? Why would we want to keep these records for so long? Right? So we have slow progression of certain medical conditions. Right? So we want to track, but we could track for 10 years, you know. And after 10 years, we throw it away. We don't need to keep it for 25. In 10 years, you could gather plenty data to pick up trends. But the law ain't tell we 10 years. The law mandates us to keep it for 25 years. Why 25 and not 10? I believe we could gather enough information in 10 years. But OSHA say no, 10 years is not enough. Put it for 25. But why are we monitoring them for so long? Why would we want to monitor them for so long? Why can't we monitor them for 5 years, for 10 years? So Lalchan getting us somewhere where we need to go. Thank you very much, Rashida. So we have occupational diseases that don't manifest any health complications until sometimes 20 or 25 years later. So if we monitor only up to 10 years, we will miss the opportunity to diagnose or pick up that something is going wrong, right? Because with occupational diseases, you don't just wake up one morning, stretch, yawn, go to work and realize that you have an occupational disease. Occupational disease are slow, they are long, they are progressive. So with you monitoring this employee's health over time, you're going to actually start seeing the degradation of the person's health. Somebody don't wake up one morning and realize, good, my pressure high. That's when you probably now picked it up. But if your pressure is something that you were monitoring from since age 25, you're going to notice that every 5 years, you may touch up one digit. Or you may see the progression of the pressure increasing. So by the time you reach 50 and your pressure starts to read 150 over 100, that is not a wake up one morning and realize the pressure high. You would have seen it increasing over time. That is the purpose of health surveillance, is to monitor that health over time. It gives the employer the opportunity to make timely interventions to prevent long-term health complications. Right? Everybody understands that. So we spoke about the Health and Safety Committee, right? So we don't need to go into too much discussion here, right? So we spoke about the purpose of the committee. So let's talk about fire now. So the fire section pertains to any place of employment or industrial establishment, as the law likes to put it, that has 20 persons or more. Or let's say you are an occupier and you occupy, let's say, the first floor. If you have 10 employees occupying that first floor, then this section applies to you as well. Good? Now, you may not have 20 or more persons. You may not have 10 persons above the ground floor, but you may be dealing with flammable, toxic chemicals, explosives, and all these different things. This section also applies to you as an employer. Yes? So for this section, you have 3 criteria. 20 or more persons, 10 or more persons occupying a floor above the ground floor, or you deal with explosives, flammable, or toxic chemicals and materials. Yeah? So we understand who this section speaks to. Let's go into now what this section requires persons to do. So if this section applies to you as an employer, you must apply to the fire authority, which is the Trinidad and Tobago Fire Service, for what is known as a fire certificate. So when you make your application, there's a fee. They come in, they inspect, they tell you where to put extinguishers, the type of extinguishers, the size, where to put your emergency lighting, if they get a sprinkler system, you get an alarm system. They tell you that you have to do drills. They will come and see you execute a drill to make sure everybody understand the emergency procedures. And they will walk through, make sure you have proper storage for your chemicals, make sure your aisles are clear, make sure you have sufficient emergency exit, and la 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 la. And then they're going to issue you a fire certificate. When you get that certificate, you laminate it and you have it posted in a strategic location in your industrial establishment. So if other officers come and do follow-up inspections, or an OSH inspector come and do inspections, the certificate is visible for them to see. Yeah? So this section talks about means of escape. So this is different from what we discussed last week with access and egress. So your access and egress last week that we spoke about is your main thoroughfare, your main access points to your office, your building, your organization. Under the fire section, when we talk about means of escape, we are talking about fire exits. So your emergency exits are not your main thoroughfare. I've seen organizations, you have big emergency exit markup above the door, but your door opening and closing, whole day, people in and out of the space. That is not the function of your emergency exits. And fire service will be looking at those things as well, right? You must have emergency signs. Where's your muster point? Is it properly identifiable? Are your exits clearly identified? Even those exit signs, the law gives very detailed description about how those signs supposed to look. It talks about green writing on a white luminous background, right? So it's not anything that you feel that you get, that you find, and you put it up and it mark exit and you're good with that. No. The law is very descriptive as to how these signs supposed to look. And fire service, when they come, they're going to be looking for these signs. Emergency lighting. So if you have operations that require to take place during a period of power failure or power outage, you must have emergency lightings in that space. Now, when you're going into the detail of fire safety and all of that, they will talk about your standby generators. So if you have standby generators that will power the building during power failure, then you may be exempted from having emergency lightings and all of that. That conversation only comes up when you are actually going through the process for your fire certificate, right? Firefighting equipment, what you all think that is? What is firefighting equipment? We don't know what is firefighting equipment? Gas mask? Kevin, how does a gas mask help us fight the fire? How does the fire alarm help us fight the fire? Remember, we're talking about firefighting equipment. That's what the law talks about, firefighting equipment. So we have water hose, fire extinguishers, gotta have fire mats, fire beaters, sprinkler systems, right? How does the axe help us fight the fire? How does the axe help us fight fires? It does, and that's all it does. Help you break down doors. Okay, so when you break down the door and you get in the burning room, we use the axe and What we do with the axe after we break down the door and we get in there? We and the fire stand up face to face. The axe can't help you again at that point. So the axe is only equipment to help you get in. But the law is talking about firefighting equipment. You must have firefighting equipment and sufficient number of persons trained to use it. Right? So extinguishers, hose reel system, sprinkler system, fire blankets, fire beaters. How many of you all remember gas stations? Long time used to have a pail of sand, a barrel of sand by the pump. Or you're too young to know about that. No, not fire PPE. Fire PPE don't help us fight fires. It protects us during the fire, but it does not fight the fire. Good. So that pail of sand could also be considered your firefighting equipment. I'm not too sure how practical it may be because sand is very dense. So for you to lift that to actually pour it on your fire, that is another problem by itself. But if you could, the sand will help extinguish the fire. Right? So that is as much as we could talk about with fire. I will just leave with you the sections that speak specifically about the signage. So if you look at that's 27, section 27, subsection 4, that gives the specification for the sign. Every door or exit route affording means of escape in the case of a fire or giving access thereto, other than the means of exit in ordinary use, shall be distinctly and conspicuously marked by a notice print in green letters on a white background with lettering of such size as the fire authority may specify. So it's not how we feel what the sign should look like and all of that. And you see, they speak specifically about those exit routes other than your ordinary exits. Lawyers is just right to confuse you. What they're saying is your main door is not your exit route, your emergency exit route. That is your main door. Your emergency door is what they're telling you must have these conspicuously marked signs over them. And the fire officers, when they come, they will be looking for that. Under this section as well, under section 28, it speaks to having drills. I remember one person in work asking me, but why we have to conduct drills? Where in the act says that we have to conduct drills? So under section 28, it talks about in the industrial establishment where you have 20 or more persons. Because remember, this section speaks to that number of persons. The law is saying the persons employed must be familiar with the means of escape, the use and the route to be familiar with in case of a fire, record the number and frequencies of drills shall be kept and presented on demand. Section 28. Right? The section that speaks about firefighting equipment, that is section 29, and having sufficient number of persons trained to use it. So it's nice that you have a hose reel system, but if nobody knows how to use it, that and nothing is the same thing. Good. So you have fire extinguishers, lovely extinguishers. They're posted all over the industrial establishment, but nobody knows how to use the extinguisher. Guess what? Your place and the extinguishers will burn down the same way. Good. So we must have the firefighting equipment and sufficient number of persons trained to use them. Good. Any questions on fire before we move on to welfare? No? Right. So welfare talks about we kind of touched on it last class. It talks about that cool supply of drinking water, not cold water in fridge and all these different things. The law says, shall be made and provide and maintain is at suitable points conveniently situated for all persons employed therein a sufficient supply of cool, wholesome drinking water. Right? So it's clear, black and white section 39 and the welfare section, we must provide drinking water for our employees. The law also talks about having separate washing facilities. We spoke about this last week. It must be separated for male and female. However, the law went on further to say if it's 5 or less persons, once the door can lock from the inside, both sexes can use the same washing facilities. Sanitary conveniences, that is your toilets, that is under section 41. The law talks about having separate toilets for male and female. Disposable units for sanitary napkins in the female washroom. You must have adequate lighting and ventilation in this space, and it must be open separate from other rooms. So you don't want to have toilets opening into your kitchen and all these different things. So it must be open to a separate area, right? Sanitary conveniences, same thing as like your showers and so forth. We spoke about that. Clothing accommodation, that is your locker facility. So that's covered under section 42. And how the law has it worded, it must be provided, maintained, distinct and apart from sanitary conveniences, lunchrooms. It must be separate men and women, so it's not cohabited. It's not, didn't specify people who have no particular gender, male and female, right? Suitable locking facilities inside. Yeah, that's your locker facilities. So locker facilities must be separate and apart. It must be properly maintained. It must be clean. So you don't want to have dirty clothes, guys, thrown over the locker door, all the dirty clothes shoved in a corner. Get your dirty clothes, take it home, wash it, or if the operations in your organization is as such that you deal with chemicals, or like us in WASA, where we deal with wastewater, those clothing remain on the facility and are laundered on the facility. You don't take those things home because you're not going to be taking those hazards home to your families. Yes? So this is the reason why the law tells employers to separate your locker facilities from your sanitary conveniences and your lunchrooms. Because everything that comes off of your clothes, it now becomes aerosolized. It's going to rest on surfaces within your lunchroom and within your kitchen, within your bathroom area. You, with your hands, you're going to now touch these surfaces and you're going to introduce them into your body, either through your eyes, through your nose, through your mouth, or through any other possible opening that you have. I'm quite aware that you all could envision what I'm talking about, right? So that is why the law is clear. The locker rooms must be separate and apart. Under this section talks about first aid kit. Well, you'll see it mentioned as first aid box or cupboard. Same thing, first aid kit. These kits are manned not by the supervisor, not by the manager, not by the most senior person in the section, but these kits are manned by a trained first aider. If we go to section 43.3, each first aid box or cupboard shall be under the control of responsible persons who are trained in first aid treatment and retested every 3 years. So this thing where we like to leave the first aid kit locked up in a cupboard or it lock in a supervisor's office. No. It must be under the responsibility of a trained first aider. Good? And first aiders must be retrained every 3 years. Right, so canteens and lunch facilities, that is only available if your organization has 250 or more persons employed. If it's just 10 of y'all, bring your lunch to work, right? Or go by Mario's or KFC or whoever it may have close by. But there's no need to go and make noise for a canteen. Good, accident reporting. So listen, life happens. Things go wrong. So how do we deal with it? We need to preserve the scene. So where somebody may have died or they suffer critical injury, and remember last week when we spoke about critical injury, we spoke about a broken hand or foot, not a finger or toe, amputated hand or foot, not a finger or toe, loss of consciousness, loss of excessive blood, loss of sight or hearing. All those things are critical injury, right? So when an accident happens and the person injury falls into one of those categories, we need to preserve the scene. Now, in preserving the scene, we may have to do some things. We may have to do some damage control. So the person is critically injured. So we need to get them to the hospital or we need to administer first aid. So that is the only reason or the only time you are allowed to go into this accident scene, right? You are allowed to go into the accident scene if you are restoring some level of service, public service, transportation or utility. So a TNTech line drop, it burst, somebody got shock, the critical, we have to get them to the hospital. But this line is still on the ground. It may still be energized. TNTech need to get in there to address that. So the law makes provision for that. The law also makes provision for you going in and turning off any equipment to prevent any further damage or maybe causing another accident or creating a catastrophe out of a disaster. Good? So we have 3 reasons by which we could enter an accident scene to do anything. Outside of that, or let's stay out, please. Don't go back in there to get your phone, your handbag, your house keys, your car keys, your pictures, your academic certificates. Don't go back in there for that. That's non-critical. As critical as it may seem to you at that point in time, when it comes to life or death, it's not critical. Right? Now, the law under section 46 starts to explain to us when and give us some timelines as to when we should report these accidents. So again, you all remember those OSH reportable accidents, right? One where we have death or critical injury, one where the person sought medical attention, they're unable to perform their usual duties, or any accident that had the potential to cause death or critical injury. Those are the 4 criteria for reportable accidents. So the law is saying, the law has given us timelines from section 46 go down when we report these different categories of accidents. So where the person die or is critically injured, they break a hand, they break a foot, they cut off the hand, cut off the foot, they fall from height, they're unconscious, whatever, excessive bleeding. The law is saying you have to report that immediately. Immediately. So you're calling them or you're notifying them by phone, fax, or email. I'm not too sure how much people still using fax now, but phone, fax, or email. And after you do that, you have to notify them on the prescribed form within 48 hours. So don't call them and tell them the accident happened and feel, well, okay, you meet the legal requirement. No, calling is one part of it. You need to now follow it up with the form. Everybody have that. Everybody understands that, right? And once that accident is reported to us, you need to maintain a register of all those accidents that were reported. It's called your accident register. And those registers, we maintain them for 5 years. Why do we keep accident registers for 5 years? Because based on the law, OSH can bring forward a case against an employer within 2 years of the accident happening. So if the agency can take you to court for an accident 2 years later, you need to have your evidence in place for the duration of the possible court case, which could now extend into 5 years, right? So a person was critically injured and we would have notified the OSH agency by phone, fax, and email, and then we would have followed it up with the form. But then this person subsequently died. You all remember the employee from Massey who died in the Nikon accident? So at the time when that fire happened and the employee was injured, Massey would have had to notify OSHA. The employee was sent to Colombia to receive treatment for burns, but the employee subsequently died. Massey now has 48 hours to notify OSHA that this is now the outcome of this critical injury. So again, don't say to yourself, well, I notified them when he got injured, you know. So they know that the accident happened and they know he in hospital. But they don't know that he died. So you need to follow up your notification and let them know the person has now subsequently died. Next category of OSH reportable accidents, where the employee is unable to perform their usual task, you have 4 days to report that, right? Don't say, well, the person not on sick leave, they're on work, but you have a welder doing pay sheet, but he on work. That's good for you. You are managing your lost time. I'm happy for you. But based on the law, the welder is not doing welding work. He's doing pay sheet. So he is unable to perform his usual duties. And by that, you must notify the agency within 4 days. Let's look at the last one, occupational diseases. So we maintaining the health registers for 25 years. And in us maintaining that, the occupational specialist now tells us, listen, you see this person here? We're seeing early signs of lung cancer. And we believe it may develop into mesothelioma, which is a cancer as a result of exposure to asbestos. And we're seeing early signs of it. Once the occupational specialist tells you that, as an employer, you have 4 days to notify the inspector. Okay? Now, it's different when the occupational specialist realize that this person is now developing this occupational disease. The health officer has 48 hours to inform the inspector, to inform the agency. So the employer has 4 days, but the doctor has 48 hours. You understand? Yeah? Good. Right, so the administration part of the act. So here's where we're going to talk about the powers of the inspector. And they have some serious powers. Don't underestimate these guys and gals that tend to walk around and smile and they have a good time with you, and don't underestimate them. So when they come into your industrial establishment, and get this, they can come without a warrant. Bad as police are, before police come to inspect or turn a screw in your house or your property, they need to have a warrant. USH inspectors don't. They have all authority under the act. Come into your workplace and do these things here. Inspect your records, inspect your premises, take photographs, examine anything that they see. They can take samples of your operations or maybe some chemicals that you may have for further analysis. They can bring a doctor, an engineer, any type of specialist they require to analyze or inspect your operations. They can ask you for your training records, your accident records, your health surveillance records, your accident investigation report. They can ask you for your maintenance logs. They can ask you for the MSDS for the chemicals that you have on site. They can ask you for your GSA, your job safety analysis, or your risk assessment. They can ask you for your standard operating procedures for this particular operation. They can ask you for any document as it relates to your operations or the equipment that you use in your operations. Yeah? So get this. If you decide you are withholding information from them, they can initiate legal proceedings and you can be charged for obstructing an inspector in the execution of his or her duties. Yes? So whatever they ask for, literally best and provided for them now. Please and thanks. They can serve you prohibition notices. What is that? That is where they ban you from using a particular equipment or occupying a particular space. They can issue an improvement notice. Again, what is that? That is where they find violations. They find you lacking or wanting in some area, and they serve you this improvement notice telling you you have 3 months, 7 days, 10 days, 5 days to improve this violation or face legal proceedings. Yeah? So that's the powers of the inspector. Last part now, we're going to be talking about penalties because all the Trini people harden. If all they don't get licks, all they're not going to comply. So the law say, okay, no problem. So if you have a court order and you fail to comply with it because you're bad like that, you can face $10,000 for every day that you don't comply with that court order. So this is an example of where the candle actually costs more than the funeral. So when you could have just spent money and fixed whatever the shortcoming is, you might actually spend more money in penalties or fines. You now have to ask and wonder, does that make financial sense? Right? Look at the second one now, where no penalty is expressly provided. So all through the act, those of you who are reading it, you're going to see where the law in a particular section will tell you that if you fail to comply with this section, it's a violation, and you could be fined on summary conviction of la 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 la, and it will tell you what the penalty is for violating that particular section. But the majority of sections under the law doesn't have such sections that tell you what the penalties are. So the law is saying where you don't have a penalty expressly provided, blanket penalty, $20,000 and 1 year imprisonment. So you might say to yourself, yeah, I could cough up that 20,000, no problem. But could you spend 12 months in jail? Could you? Anderson have money, so Anderson could easily pay that $20,000. But Anderson, could you see yourself spending 12 months in jail, a whole year? Because it's not an either or. They're taking your money and they're locking you up. So you have no all-inclusive to go to. You have no island crashers to go to. You have no Christmas function to go to. You're deprived of a lot of things. 12 months. Is it worth it? Look at the next one. So if somebody dies, and I hope that this is not the case with Massey, you can now be charged $100,000 or 3 years the person's salary, whichever one is greater. If the agency has found that you, the employer, was the reason this accident occurred that would have claimed the life of this employee, the court is going to order you, the employer, to pay $100,000. Now again, here you have to pay this fine, and get this, you still have to go and spend money to fix whatever you didn't want to fix before that resulted in the accident. So does it make sense? Does this sound like financial sense? So employers who like to feel they want to put production above safety, you don't want to train your employees, you don't want to buy certain equipment, you don't want to put in certain systems in place because that costs them too much money. You don't want to buy PPE for your employees because that costs them too much money. I ain't sending you to train because that costs them too much money. But look at some of these fines. And after the court order you to pay these fines, the court is going to order you to still fix, train, or buy the same equipment that you say you wasn't going to buy because it was costing too much money. Safety and operations go hand in hand. You cannot have a productive organization and you're shortcutting on safety. It will never work. It will never work. You do your own analysis. Look at all the organizations that have safety as their number one priority. Check what their profit levels are. And I'm not talking about in Trinidad and Tobago. Look at those organizations globally. Those organizations that spare nothing, that don't stop short at ensuring that every screw is in the right place where safety is concerned. Check where the profit margins are for those organizations, as opposed to those companies or organizations that always find that is too much money. They always having accidents. They always have to be paying out money for something. And because of that, they continue to be misers. The choice is yours. Let's continue to look at penalties. So you went and you falsely or you fabricate a fire certificate, because remember we just look at the fire section, and the fire section talks about an organization that have 20 or more persons must have a fire certificate. You ain't had time to deal with fire service because again, you're cheap. So you don't want to pay the $500 that fire service asks you to pay to get a fire certificate. So you organize something and you make up your fire certificate. $500 as opposed to $25,000. The math's not mathsing. Now you might say, you forge the certificate because you know if you pay that $500, they will now come and tell you have to install the fire alarm system and get fire extinguishers, and you ain't have no money for that. Okay, no problem. But get this, the court realized that this accident happened because you didn't have systems in place. In fact, they find that you would have forged that fire certificate. So look at your predicament. You had to pay $25,000. You still have to go and pay the $500 to get fire service to come in and inspect your place. You still have to spend the money and get the fire alarm system and the extinguishers and the hose reel system that you was trying to navigate around all the time. And your reputation now on the line. Make it make sense. Everybody understanding my logic, right? And I'm not trying to sell my profession. I'm trying to let you see how my profession helps organizations make profit. The two must go hand in hand. Look at the next fine here. All of you sticky finger people who like to go and interfere with the extinguisher and squeeze the lever to see how much content it have. There's a nice fine of $5,000 and 3 months imprisonment for interfering with safety devices, right? Obstructing an inspector, $2,000 and 6 months imprisonment. Yeah. So that brings us to the end of session 2. It also brings the curtain down on the discussion about the Occupational Safety and Health Act. That now means that your first assessment will open next week. Please go at 8 p.m. So everything we would have discussed and covered last week and this week, you will be assessed on it next week. Hence the reason I would have been asking the questions in class to get people's mind open and get people's mind juggling. But a lot of people were asleep or they're afraid to answer or they're not sure if they should answer, how they should answer, right? But to each his own. So next week, the first assessment opens. It will open at 8 p.m. It will be available for 1 week. So when you access it, you cannot close off and go back to it at a later date. Once you access it, you must answer all the questions and submit. If you close it off before time, the system is going to grade you on what you would have marked and you would receive 0 for everything else that you did not attempt. Okay? So, go over the recordings, go over the presentations, and familiarize yourself with the information. The assessment will be multiple choice and some match the answers questions. So it shouldn't be too hard. Once you were attentive in class, because a lot of the questions that come are from our discussions in the classroom, right? Watching the presentation alone may not always help. The question comes from the dialogue and the discussions that we have in class. Hence the reason why I ask the questions during class, right? Now, concluding here, I know some people may ask themselves or may be wondering, does OSHA really fine anybody with these fines, these penalties that they have in the law and all of that? Yes, they do. And under session 2, I would have uploaded a couple of those judgments. How many of you all have seen it and gone through them? How many of you all saw those judgments? Right. So for many of you who wondering if OSH real, if OSH serious, if OSH could do these things that we have in the law, yes, they can. And you're going to see WASA all starring in those judgments as well. So you all read up see what are the sections of the law that they quoted that they would fined under, and see what are some of the fines that they received. And it's big name companies in Trinidad too. So you'll have a look-see, have a read, and edify yourself. Any questions before we depart? Anybody have any questions they need to ask? No questions? Okay. I will take it that everybody understood what was done, and we will be more than well capable and able to attempt the assessment next week, please God. Right? But if for some reason you have a question after the class, you can post your question in the question and answer forum, and I will answer your question there. Sion, we did, if you're in class today, I did address your question that you asked in the forum. Right? When the assessment opens, you have 1 hour to complete it. After an hour, if you're not complete, it's going to close off and it's going to grade whatever you would have attempted, and anything else that you didn't, it's going to give you a 0. Right? Half mark will be a 50% marker. Right? So, if we have no further questions, I bid you good night, and we will meet again next week, please God.